Branding is one of the most misunderstood marketing terms because it's so much more than having just a name and a logo. And although those are very important parts of branding, they're just a small part of it. I live right in the heart of cattle country, Alberta, Canada, and I think that cowboys have explained branding much better than most marketers do. When a cowboy or cow-gal brand their cattle or horses, they sear this image into the animal so that all the other ranchers know that that animal belongs to that specific rancher. So for a company, we need to sear into our potential customer's mind this image of what it is that we can do for them, what benefits they will receive once they purchase our product or service. So therefore, you can see how a brand is so much more than just the name and the logo. It's all of the touch points integrated together to say the same message. Now, if we don't look at all the touch points of where our consumers come in front of our business, then if they aren't saying the same message, we end up fragmenting our brand. And when we fragment our brand, what happens is we just confuse people. I don't really know what that business is all about because their website says this, their business card says this, their name says this, and hey, their slogan or their brand says this. So we confuse people. And when we confuse people, we just break down that element of trust, and people need trust to purchase a product. So when we fragment our brand and we confuse people, we end up finding that customers don't buy when they're confused. So branding is so much more. What we've done is we've broken the whole concept of branding into multiple vignettes for you to take a look at in these Wowpreneur programs. And we'll address each area of branding based on a specific area for that video. Thanks for watching. So let's talk about fonts. This is an example of fonts used for XYZ company. All the fonts are bold and all are the same 20-point size. Notice how different each font sample looks. Which do you find easy to read and which do you find hard to read? When you look at each one of these font samples, do you make a quick judgment on the type of business that XYZ company may be? Some of those samples project conservative, while others project maybe a modern look, while others just project silly. If you were XYZ company, which sample would you prefer? Well, here's something I'm going to tell you that you are not going to want to hear. It doesn't matter which one of those you prefer. It only matters which your potential customer prefers. And that's the key with all branding, and the hardest fact for business owners to accept. It is not about you when it comes to branding. It's all about them. It doesn't matter what you like. All your branding should be focused on what will be most accepted by your target customer. So let's say you have a company called Bob's Gym. Your target is men who are serious about building muscle. The font on your left is bold Arial font, 32 point. Does it project the image of the man on the left? Now what if you change the font to the font on the right? It's called Bradley, and it is also 32 point. Does it project the image of the man on the left? Okay, so now what if you switched images so that the not so muscular guy is under the bold Arial font of Bob's Gym and the muscular guy is under the not so bold font of Bradley? Does that change your image? It's surprising how fonts can create an image in people's minds. The key to good branding is to ensure that the font matches the image that you want to project. Fonts. He who has the most fonts wins. Well, not necessarily, and probably not at all. If you're on a Windows system, every time you load a program, it will put fonts in your computer's font file. Windows has thousands of fonts. The key with fonts and branding is don't fall in love with a font until you know that you can reproduce it in multiple ways. For the most part, printers, newspapers, sign companies are primarily on Mac systems, and they don't have as many or all the fonts that Windows does. Yes, they will have an Arial font like our Bob's Gym example, but it may be a bit thicker than a Windows font. So what, you say? Well, it actually could be an issue based on the size of the font that you're wanting to use and the selection of where you want to put that font. When selecting a font, find several that you like, then go to a print shop, a service bureau, sign company, and look at the fonts that they have. Select as close as you can to the font that you like. You want to be consistent with your branding, so you don't want your promotional material to look different than ones that you've had to take to a service bureau. You want consistency when it comes to the brand font that you use. Now, fonts fall into two categories, and I don't want to get too technical on this, but you do need to know these categories. Not necessarily their names, but how different they are. Number 1 on your screen is called a serif font. Number 2 is called a sans serif font. If you look closely, the end and the start of the letter G. With the serif font, it has a little flick on the start and the end, where the sans serif G does not. This is important because that little flick at the end encourages a reader's eye to move to the next letter, thus making a document easier to read. You will note that newspapers all have the content of a story in a serif font, and that's because they want to make it easy on the eye to read all the copy. With a sans serif font, that's the bottom G without the little flicky things at the end. These fonts are usually used for headlines because they appear bolder than the serif fonts. Why do you need to know this? Well, if you're creating marketing material that has a lot of copy, like a website, a brochure, an annual report, something like that, then you want to make sure your copy is using a serif font, and then you would use a sans serif font as headlines to break up the long text and make it appear as it's not an effort to read the entire document. The eye is a funny body part. It gets extremely lazy and tired. And if you want someone to read your marketing material, make sure that you use the right fonts. Now, one last thing about fonts. Be very, very careful if you use too much capital letters. In this example, watch, all capital is 3 words, all capitals. Well, what happens is, by doing it that way, we create this invisible line that makes the eye just bounce right over the words. And if the eye bounces right over those words, it doesn't really read those words. If you look at the one underneath, watch, all capitals, the eye actually has to bounce along the top of those words. And by doing that, what it does is it makes the eye stay on the words a little bit longer, thus remembering it. And in marketing and branding, the more we can encourage the eye and the brain to remember something, the better that is. Okay, let's wind this session up. Fonts. They are a very important part of your branding and can project exactly the image that you want or fragment your brand by projecting exactly what you don't want. Don't fall in love with a font until you know that it can be reproduced in multiple ways. Sign companies, newspapers, print shops, all of those where other people will be projecting your name. Use serif and sans serif fonts properly and watch all capitals. Remember, we're always, always, always trying to trick that eye because it's a lazy little body part. And there you go, fonts. Make sure you put your best font forward.